Hi, and welcome to the first in this feature called Wondrous Tones. So what we'll be doing in each of these videos is looking at some combinations of Eurorack modules or semi-modular units of a variety of different sorts and talk about some of the possibilities and combinations and forms of modulation, timbral, sonic experiments that we can achieve with these various modules or pieces of semi-modular gear, or really any kind of music technology that might work in your setup as it does in mine. So for this particular one, I'm looking at 4 modules here, and I'll go through these and then we'll jump directly into the sound demo. So first I have the emitter Versio. And if you know about the noise engineering Versio modules, they're quite incredible. They have open firmware. I know a lot of people are developing unique new firmware for these modules. And on their website, Noise Engineering has a variety of different firmware software that you can download, and you can get anything from a granular reverb to this particular reverb that I have on here, the Desmodus Versio. You can get a delay, combination delay and reverb. It's really an incredible module in terms of being able to take advantage of open source and freely available firmware. What's awesome about this is if you go to World of Versio, you get the firmwares for free. So the modules are fairly expensive, but when you get the firmware for free, in a sense, you could think of it as buying one module and getting 5 others for free, or 6, or however many different firmware arrangements that they create over time. So I use this particular reverb because I just think it sounds super incredible. It really is quite unlike my other big reverb I use, which is my Wondrous dual reverb. And this one has so much you can do sonically with the tone of the sound that I just find it absolutely incredible and creates these awesome dark textures, particularly as you go in and adjust the angle parameter. In a sense, it almost reminds me of creating different tones with your reverbs. So this will be the master out of the Morphagene, and the Morphagene is the second module that we'll be looking at using today. And I particularly wanted to use the Morphagene because it's one of these modules that is incredible. As you know, it's a very alternative sampler. If you know about the work of Curtis Rhodes, who's written about time and music, Morphagene, Make Noise Morphagene actually uses some quotes from Curtis Rhodes' book on time and music. And this particular module really shows you the potential of Eurorack modular synthesis in terms of creating things with your modules, in this case with sampling, that you can't do in any kind of other form of sampling. You could certainly do this in a VST, but nothing that gives you the control and the ability to modulate the different parameters, which you're going to see in this patch today. The other reason I wanted to use a Morphagene, it's one of these modules that I think is absolutely incredible, but I sometimes struggle with. And so one of the things we'll be talking about in this feature as more videos are made are some possibilities of taking some deep dives into your modules, into your Eurorack modules, maybe some of those you don't use as often. Just looking around my Eurorack case, you know, there are other modules out there that I don't use enough, like maths. And so maybe sometimes I forget something as simple as the inputs and the outputs. So one of the things we can do in these videos is really develop an appreciation of just learning our modules, knowing what the attenuverters do, knowing in this case how the time control works in terms of being able to take your sample, speed it up forward and also speed it up backward. Just some of the cool features that you can take advantage of in such a full-fledged module like Morphagene. One of the great things about this module is its complexity. It's also one of its downsides, if you will. So the complexity allows you to do incredible things, but it maybe doesn't have that ability as one of your simple. I look at some of my remaining, I've sold many of them, but say my Pico modules, my Erica synths, or my 2HP modules that have maybe just a few points of control, just a few knobs or attenuverters that allow you to do some things with the sound. But with a full-fledged module like this, you can really begin to appreciate the levels of complexity. Again, the downside of that is the fact that you have to learn and really kind of develop your own mental or even muscle memory approaches to the module so you kind of know what you're doing. And I recently saw a great tutorial for the Morphagene on the Once Upon a Time synth page, kind of an older one, but it really just gave me a great appreciation of how you can simplify what's going on in a module like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to trigger a source here in Poly Hector, this module, which I just picked up and is quite amazing. I'll talk about in a second. And then we're going to record that once in the video. And then I'm going to play with this and leave what essentially is the wet and dry mix. If it's all the way to the left, you're just hearing the original signal. If it's all the way to the right, you're hearing whatever the tape loops, either through the reels, the grains, and the various permutations of the samples happen to be playing. So I'm going to actually have it at about 50%. To me, I think of it as a wet-dry knob on a reverb, so I would have that at about 50%. The wet signal is the tape manipulation. The total dry signal is the original source coming in, which for this patch will be Hector. So you're going to hear that, and then what you're going to see in this patch is I take advantage of some of the modulations. So we're actually going to modulate it from Hector at these 3 points, basically at the slide, morph, and the grain CV points. We're then going to take the 2 outputs, including what really amounts to an envelope follower here, and further modulate the sound inside of Hector. So Hector, if you're familiar with this module, it's an open source module that you can use to create just incredible patches of all different sorts. And what I love about this module is it allows you to do so much. It has 6 inputs and 8 outputs, as well as the MIDI in and out. So you can do a ton with this module. It also has USB, and you can use that to update and bring in new patches, or what they call modules here. It's a great, almost like it's its own little digital modular system within a modular system. So this itself takes the place of literally hundreds of modules. And what I'll be doing in this particular patch is using some of the really cool ports of the various mutable instruments modules. And so I just have these, I think, under one of these categories. So the first one I'm going to be using in this video is what they call the Chaos Controller, and this is built on Mutable, again, the software port of Mutable Marbles, and I don't have that particular module. So what I wanted to do in getting the PolyFX Hector was to have a module that could replace many of my other modules, and in particular I had one of the Daisy Chain, Daisy Patch modules that I sold on Reverb. Thank you to the person who bought it. I actually thought that module was going to do what this module does. The Daisy Chain module allows you to bring in patches off the internet, but it's super cumbersome to work with, I found, and also you can only have one at a time. What's amazing about Hector, and also the pedal version of this as well, is the fact that you can have all these various effects or modules, Eurorack modules here, including these that are ported. You can create your own, you can download people's own variations of modules and new creations. And so this is awesome because it allows me to do so much in the space of one module. It's not a lot of HP really. It's a fairly big module, as you can see, almost twice the size of Morphagene, but it does so much that it's one of the most cost-effective and also rack space effective modules I think you can have in your entire setup, case, whatever. So this is I'm going to be using the Chaos Controller again, which is a mutable port of marbles, and I have adjustments that you'll see in there of the various outputs. And then what I'll do is I will route that to 2 versions of yet another very cool mutable ports, and this is specifically Platts. And so what I'll do is you'll see in the video, create 2 of those. And what's really cool about this system, as you're seeing here, you can move things around and you can start patching things. So you can patch, for example, an output from the Chaos Controller into one of the macro oscillators here, the Platts oscillator. So I can take CV3 out and I could modulate then, I think I did a lot of volt per octave. So I have that input set up. I'll do another input to the other oscillator. I'll take each of these, a simple mono out to 1 and 2, and then 1 and 2 is going to go into Morphagene. What I'm going to do, and the reason I'm calling this focus for this first of these videos, Wondrous Tones, talking about modulation, is I really want to talk about the possibilities of going back and forth with a select set of modules, in this case 4 modules. You're not going to see a lot happening with the CV inputs with the Versio, although I could do a ton with that. I just didn't do it in this version, this particular video. I'll do it in the future. but you're going to see interplay between these two modules in terms of CV and also audio, and you're going to see then taking additional outs from these same two macro oscillators. Those will go into one of my favorite new modules, which is the qubit data bender, which is a module that mutates and warps and destroys your sound in ways that I find absolutely incredible. The fact that you can clock all those mutations, this is unclocked, this would be clocked. In this particular case, I didn't bring in a clock source, but I could. I've done that in the past. What I love about that is it's almost taking your, could be percussive or even drone sounding sounds that you create in any of your modules, and it's processing those sounds, but in a way that's quite different from Morphagene. Morphagene could do some similar things. What I love about Data Bender is with percussive instances, it's almost creating these polyrhythms or tails or artifacts, if you will, that fall along these various parameters of audio destruction, which is influenced by, say, old style tape machines or audio buffers maybe that go bad. Even the sound of, say, a modem, an old dial-up modem. I'm old enough to remember what those sound like. We would use AOL and dial up our modem. I had one of those acoustic coupling modems. It reminds me some of those sounds of what you can produce with Data Bender. So we're going to take the same outputs, audio outputs from the macro oscillators. We're going to pump those into Data Bender, and then this is coming out. It's going into very simple plate reverb from my Wondrous dual reverb, and then it's going into my mixer. So I'm only using 4 channels of sound in this experiment. You're going to hear then, actually it's 6 channels of sound, so you're going to hear the original oscillators playing here from the Chaos controller, those 2 mono outs. Because I have this at 50%, you'll hear that, and you'll also hear what I call the wet signal, which is the one recording I do of the same oscillator, and then that recording is mixed in. And of course, because I'm adjusting, I think I started off relatively fast and then a little slower, I'm creating kind of a drone effect there that's playing along. I'm not interested in those rhythmic tails as I talked about with, say, the Data Bender that I've done in some other audio experiments. Instead, I'm interested in creating kind of a sonic underlayer using Morphagene here, almost like a drone machine that is being adapted through this cross modulation that we see going on here. The other 2 sources of 2 channels of sound, as I mentioned, would be the outs from Hector, those same 2 oscillators of Platts, the 2 mono oscillators, going into Data Bender. That goes into the Wondrous dual reverb. So you actually have 6 channels of sound going on simultaneously, which is really intentional because I wanted to experiment with taking these very simple oscillators here from Hector and using those in some unique ways. Now, I use a couple of the different oscillators. I believe I use the modal and also the bass drum module. You'll see that live. You're not going to see all the fine details here, but I use those 2. And then I go in and adjust the tone a little bit, and then the modulation is really key. So when I set up the inputs and the outputs, I really wanted to take advantage of this particular type of sound that I like getting with some of my bell modules, including elements, rings, and even my 2HP bell, and some other modules out there as well, where I often will trigger with a simple gate signal the trigger in of the particular module, the bell sound, and then I'll use some other audio source, or I might use an envelope generator. I might use a very fast envelope playing, near audio rate, and then I modulate the volt per octave input. You're going to hear a lot of modulation of the volt per octave inputs. It's one of my favorite tricks. It's not really a trick, but I just like using it in ways to create these bell-like timbres that sound to me very like aleatoric, almost buchla-like, maybe a little too high-pitched and almost more pristine than the buchla sound, but something to me that sounds very experimental just in terms of the timbre, because the triggering is not happening, using traditional sort of well-tempered scales or quantizers that are producing particular pitches within a scale, but more producing timbres that are pitched. But at least for me, my brain or my ears not really picking up on the pitchness of it, if that makes sense. When you hear this, it will make a little more sense. So that cross modulation means then I take some additional outputs from these two oscillators and I send those into a variety of these outputs. And again, that's going to control grain, slide, and also morph in terms of the morphagene. So we're getting cross modulation there. And then I'm also taking two outputs that are created by Morphagene, the quasi-envelope follower one here, and then also this other CV output. That's going into the input. That's further controlling the two oscillators. So you're creating like this crosstalk of audio and also of CV sources really between these three modules. The Versio, again, is simply acting as a nice lush and dark reverb kind of underneath all this as these three modules are really working together. So let me jump to the video now and sort of take in everything that's going on in terms of this particular patch that I've created for you here in Wondrous Tones, the first feature in this particular video series.